Okay, welcome to the video. SIG Guy here. This is going to be another video on another toolkit that I put together. I'm calling it the 22X D.A.R.K, the 22X Disassembly and Reassembly Kit. The 22X is basically your classic line SIGs, your 226, 228, 229, 225, so on and so forth. So as everybody knows, I'm the type of person that likes to do upgrades on my pistols, and I also love to take them completely apart every now and then to do a more thorough and complete cleaning on them. These are the tools that make it super easy to reassemble all my classic line SIGs. So I wanted to put together a quick video showing how the toolkit works. So let's get started. So let's talk about what's included in the kit really quick and what is not. The only thing that's not included is whatever you need to use to remove your grip panel screws, okay? Mine are flat tip. Not all of them are flat tip, so that's why it's not included in the kit. I have a flat tip screwdriver here for mine. And then what is included are these three tools here, the 3mm stainless steel punch. Okay, been selling these for years. We got the 4mm stainless steel punch. Again, been selling that one for years as well. And then we got a flat tip screwdriver with a magnet on one end and then a notch that I cut into the flat tip end to help us easily reinstall our sear spring. Like I said, I've been selling these for years, and I'm still going to allow the option to choose whatever color you want. There's 11 different colors to choose from. Believe it or not all my SIGs are blinged out, so I do have a completely stock P229 Legion here that we're going to demonstrate how the tool works. So let's get started taking this apart. Before we get started, we're always going to make sure we're working on a safe firearm. So we're going to remove our magazine, and typically I never even have magazines on my bench. It's only here today because I want to demonstrate a proper functions check at the end of the video. So we are going to lock our slide to the rear. We are physically and visually going to check to make sure there's no round in the chamber, no magazine. Check our breech face. We're going to look away. Do the same thing again. Chamber, magazine, breech face, safe firearm. So we can rotate our takedown lever and release our slide. As you can see, I already removed my grip panels and they're off to the side. And my hammer is also in the cocked position. A lot of times when you're trying to remove your locking insert or install it, it won't go in because your hammer is cocked. So we're going to release the hammer just like that. Also, before we get started, if you're just like replacing your sear spring either to a lighter one or actually just replacing it to put a new one in it, this is where these kind of tools come in handy. Because what we can do here is, instead of disassembling the whole pistol just to change out the spring, we can use these tools just to change it really quick. So what I would do is I would use this pocket screwdriver that got the notch in to relieve the tension on my sear spring. Okay, and we'll get into that in more detail here in a second. And then I would use my 3mm punch as a slave pin. And I would start just pressing out this pin here. I'm going to back this out just a little bit. And then what we'd use is our magnet just to retrieve that spring really quick. Okay. Get our new spring. Drop that right down inside there like that. And start working our pin back in. Line everything up. Finish pushing our original pin back in. And then we're going to use our screwdriver again to reattach our sear spring that we just put in there. Just like that. So if I was using, for example, like the competition purple sear spring from the Armory Craft, the Ultimate Spring Kit there, it's that easy just to change that spring out without taking the whole guts out of the pistol. So the first thing that I'm going to do before I start disassembling any of this, and it's going to make it a lot easier to disassemble stuff, if you're removing your trigger or your trigger bar, what's recommended is to remove your safety lever first, okay? It's this lever right here. Some of them hang down really far, which interfere with the trigger bar, make it a lot harder to get that in and out of there. So Very easy to do, just like we replaced that sear spring. Real quickly, I'm going to relieve the tension on it by disconnecting it from the post. This is the post that it's usually on right here, underneath it. So I just kind of pry it to the side, let it click up like that. And I'm going to use my 3mm punch, and I'm just going to start working my pin out there. I'm going to get my magnet on there, and that's why I put the magnet on these screwdrivers, because I use it all the time, disassembling and reassembling. I'm going to pull this punch out of there. I'm going to pull that safety lever up and out of there. See how long it is? And I'm going to push my pin back in. If it doesn't go back in, use your punch to line everything up. Just kind of move things around. Get that to slide back through the hole. And then without the spring attached, that pin can just fall out. Okay, so hook your spring back up. Use your pocket screwdriver that comes in the kit. I put it around the spring just like that. That's why I put the notch in it. I'm going to push that down and underneath that post, just like that. And that'll keep everything from falling out. So now that we have that safety lever out, it's going to be a lot easier to remove a lot of these other components. All right, so this isn't a detailed, slow video on complete disassembly and reassembly of the classic SIG pistols. I have those on my YouTube, so if you need slower paced, more thorough video on doing that, then just check out my YouTube. So I am going to remove my takedown lever by pushing on it on this side and rotating it to get that out of there. And then I'm going to remove my locking insert. Remember, my hammer's forward. I'm going to rotate it to this side and remove my trigger bar spring. And then we're going to use our pocket screwdriver to push out our trigger pivot pin. Remove my slide catch. And then I can remove my trigger and trigger bar up and out of there. That easy. So much easier without our safety lever installed, okay? The next step is going to be to remove the tension on our hammer. So we need to remove our hammer strut, the mainspring and seat. And in a previous video, I showed using like a pocket screwdriver, pushing in and up on the seat like this to unhook it from the frame. There's a much easier and actually safer way to do that. So I have a piece of painter's tape here on my bench. It's like 5 or 6 layers thick. I basically put that right here on my frame because we know the Legion frames aren't the most durable. And then we're going to put our screwdriver under here like that. And we're just going to pry that straight out, okay? But make sure you have your hand over it because we don't want that flying and hitting you in the face. I'm going to try to show this on camera. So I'm just kind of prying down on my screwdriver. You hear it click up and out of there. You see how that would have taken off if I didn't have my hand over it. So there's our seat, our strut, and our mainspring. Next thing I'm going to do to get it out of the way, and I wasn't going to remove this, but I'm going to show you the magnet trick that I use to reassemble it, the decocking lever. So we're just going to lift up on our spring here and get that up and out of there, holding it away from the frame so it doesn't scratch it. And we'll take the lever off itself, and the pivot portion there falls out the back. So all that we have left are 2 pins holding the rest of the components in here. We have the sear pivot pin and our hammer pivot pin. So I'm going to relieve the sear spring tension once again, because if you don't, all this stuff's going to come flying out as soon as you remove that pin. It's going to come flying out anyway, to tell you the truth. So I did remove my sear spring tension right there. And I'm just going to use my 3mm punch to get that pin started. And then everything's going to fall out the bottom here, so kind of put your hand over it if you want, or turn it upside down. We're going to remove our pivot pin, remove our punch, and we'll catch our sear and our sear spring. We'll remove our ejector, and then use our 4mm punch to push out our trigger pivot pin. Our hammer falls out just like that. Okay, so I might have told a little lie in the beginning. A couple more helpful things that you're going to need is, 1 is a Q-tip, and 2, it's a third hand. So that's why my pistol stands come in pretty handy, especially doing something like this, to hold the pistol while I'm reassembling it. This is available on SIGGuy.com. These are not. Anyway, so the first thing we're going to do is reassemble our hammer. Our hammer's got a little pin underneath here, inside in the middle. There's a little spring on the inside and the back here. That pin needs to be underneath that spring. So if you install it, and you can hold the frame just by holding the hammer, it's installed correctly, okay? Next, I'm going to use my 4mm punch. I can see completely through my frame. I'm going to line up my hammer and push that all the way through. That's going to hold my hammer in place where it needs to be. And then I'm going to use my factory pin to push my punch out. My punch is going to be like a slave pin. Just like that. Okay. That pin is extremely loose. That's why it's a lot easier on a stand like this if it's vertical. That way when you're holding it on the side, it doesn't fall out on you. It's going to happen probably 10 times in this process if you're doing it on the side. The next step is going to be to install my ejector. Again, I have more detailed, slower paced videos on my YouTube doing this. So if you need a slower paced video, check those out. And then I'm going to use the Q-tip to install my sear. I'm going to put that in the middle just like that. And that's going to make it super easy to get this underneath that post and up in here where it needs to be. Then I'm going to use my punch and get that started through the hole, through the ejector, and then line up my sear. Pull my Q-tip out. As you can see, if you have big hands, it's very difficult to get down in there and get that sear up and in there. The Q-tip trick is priceless. So we're going to remove our punch just a little bit to make room for our sear spring. And drop our sear spring in there. Push our punch all the way through. And then we're going to use our factory pin to push our punch out. Just like that. We'll get our pin centered. And then we're going to reattach our sear spring to put tension on all these components so that way they don't fall out, reassembling the rest. So I'm going to use the notch in the screwdriver over the sear spring leg and push that down and underneath the post and slide it to the side. Just like that. Alright, so my next step, I'm going to reattach my decocking lever. Okay. And this is called the decocking lever bearing. I used to put this on my finger like this and kind of feed it in through the back. Up under here. It goes right through this hole here. There's an easier way to do it with a magnet. Basically just stick it to the magnet like that. We'll feed it in through the back side. And hold it with my finger so I can remove the magnet. Put my other finger in just like that, holding on it. And then we'll attach our lever. And then we'll reattach our spring. This spring is pretty tough. It's got a lot of pressure on it for being such a small spring. So if you need to use a pair of needle nose, it is a lot easier. Just like that. Okay, so my next step, I'm going to install my hammer strut mainspring and mainspring seat. As you can see, my hammer is in the rearward position. It needs to be in the forward position, so be careful with this. I have my finger holding the pin, which is holding my hammer, the hammer pivot pin. I have my finger over there because this is going to want to fall out because I'm holding it on its side for one. And then when I push this forward, there's no tension on it. Right now, there's spring tension on it. So our sear is right here. It's capturing our hammer in that notch right there. So all I need to do is rotate my sear forward and then rotate my hammer up. So I'm going to use my finger and push forward on my sear, holding my pin here so it doesn't fall out. Just like that. Okay, so now my hammer is forward. Again, I'm putting my finger over it because I'm going to be holding it like this. Strut goes in through the back, goes in the center groove on your hammer, and it needs to be as far rearward and up as possible. So a lot of times people think they're where they need to be, but they're in the correct position. So what I usually do is I push on my finger with the hammer there, on the hammer with my finger. And if I can see my strut moving down, being pushed out, I know it's in the right position. So I'm going to rotate that around like this so my pin doesn't fall out. I'm going to take my seat and put it just like that, and I'm going to hold this just like a pistol with poor trigger discipline. And my finger through there. I'm just going to use my thumb to push that forward, up and into position where it needs to be. Not crooked, but straight, just like that. Okay, and then I'm going to test it to see if it works. Oops, I didn't want to lock it, but it is pushing down on there. If it's not pushing down on there and you can't rotate your hammer backwards, you're in the wrong spot. Do it all over again. Okay. Next, we're going to install our trigger portion. So a lot of times you can't install the trigger bar and the trigger separate. You got to put them together most times. With your safety lever out of the way, a lot of times you're able to do that because it's hard to get it past your sear and onto this pin where it needs to be. Okay, so make sure your trigger pivot pin is centered because that's what goes against the bar here. And I'm just going to kind of put this in here and get it started. Okay, get it past the sear right here. See how that leg wants to hit the sear? So I put it in there past the sear and hold this up. Slide my trigger on, lift it up a little bit. Put that down inside there. It'll go in smooth as silk. Okay. Next, we're going to put in our trigger pivot pin. So I'm going to use my punch here and line up my trigger, just like that. And if you get an Armory Craft dual adjustable trigger, this is the method I use right here to make my adjustments. It's a lot easier to get to both adjustment screws, and there's an adjustment screw on the factory one here. Okay, but the Armory Craft has 2 adjustment screws, and it's pretty easy holding the trigger with this pin, just like I'm doing here. So I have my pin in there, and then I'm going to use the factory pin to push mine out. Now it's all lined up. This only goes in one way. There's a slit on one side, not on the other side, and then there's notches on the bottom of the pin. So it needs to go in smooth side first, notches down at the bottom, and essentially your pin should be horizontal just like that, the slit. Okay. It's not crucial to get this all lined up right at this moment. Okay. So I got my pin in there. I'm actually going to push it through just a little bit more, holding it with my finger over here so it doesn't come flying out. Just like that. It's going to allow me to put my slide catch in there. What I do is I look right down through the hole here, slide this in, line up the hole, push it through, rotate it down. And then we can use our flat tip. So that needs to be horizontal like that when it's all said and done. But if you have it just a little bit off, it makes putting the locking insert in a lot easier, okay? So again, your hammer's got to be forward. I got my trigger, I'm holding it forward. That's slightly off center or off horizontal. Your slide catch, make sure it is against the wall at this end, because our locking insert goes in between the trigger and that slide catch. A lot of times that's over in the middle like this, and it doesn't allow room for the locking insert to slide in there. So make sure that's against the wall, okay? And then we'll take our locking insert, drop it right in there, just like that. And then I'm going to put my takedown lever in so that doesn't fall out. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to reattach my trigger bar spring. So I'm going to hold the trigger bar with my finger on the inside there in its proper position. This little notch here, the pin goes into it from our trigger pivot pin. Okay, so I'm holding it rearward. And I'm going to put my spring one end in the hole. And then hook the other end Make sure you get that in the right notch, all right? It goes in the little hook on the bottom. It does not go up top here. It will go on there, and you'll be able to reassemble it and everything, but it won't function properly. It's got to be in that little notch in the very bottom. All right, so our final step is to reinstall our safety lever. So I'm going to use my stand again, and then I'm going to use my screwdriver to remove spring tension from the sear spring. We'll just get that spring off of the post that's in there. And then we'll use our punch to start working our pin out, our pivot pin. And I'm just pushing my punch in enough to where I can see it in between the sear and the frame. Here's the frame, here's the sear. See that silver spot in the middle? Just basically pushing that in enough to where I can see that. Now I know there's clearance for my safety lever. So I'm going to rotate it this way. And what I normally do is I put my hammer in the rear because it moves the sear out of the way. Gives me room for my safety lever to drop down in there. Okay, so I can either use my magnet or my fingers. Let's try the magnet. Sometimes you go down too far and you need to pull it back up and out. I'm going to hold it just like that with my magnet. I'm going to slide it down in between there. And I'm going to push on my pin, my punch, until I feel it click through the hole in the safety lever. You can feel it going in like that. Now I'm going to release my hammer, relieve all that spring tension and tension that's on the components. And I'm going to push in on my pin, which is going to push my punch out. Okay? And then we want to make sure that our pivot pin is actually countersunk on both sides, which it is. That way our slide doesn't interfere with it. And then we're going to use our screwdriver to put our sear spring back underneath that post. Just like that. All right, so the last thing we're going to do is reassemble. You can see I got my grip panels on already. I'm going to install my slide. And then we're going to perform a function check. Okay, you should always do this every single time you disassemble and reassemble. That way we make sure it works properly when we put it back together. But before we do that, because we're going to be pulling the trigger, we're going to physically and visually check, make sure there's no round in the chamber. You might have put this down. Who knows? Can't be too safe. So chamber, no magazine, breech face, look away. Same thing all over again. Safe firearm, okay? So what we're going to do first is we're going to install our magazine. Make sure that falls out under gravity by itself, which it does. And then we're going to move our slide to the rear and make sure our slide catch pops up from the follower in the magazine, which it does. Captures my slide. I can actually remove my magazine now. Release my slide. Pull the trigger. That works fine. Do it again. Reset. That works fine. Rack my slide. Take it out of battery. Dead trigger. So I'm basically moving it out of battery just like that, just to make sure that my trigger bar is disengaged. Works fine. Okay. All right, and there you go. I probably lied to you at the beginning of this video and told you it was going to be really quick. You should know by now that none of my videos are very quick, so shame on you. That is the 22X D.A.R.K Disassembly and Reassembly Kit. That's everything I use to disassemble and reassemble my classic series SIGs. I made another kit for the 320 that's got different size punches and tools in it, as well as a 365 kit that makes it easy to reassemble your 365. So all these kits can be found on SIGGuy.com, as well as pistol stands. I got regular pistol stands, and I can do custom ones as well. And then I got tons of upgrades and other stuff for SIGs on there also. If you're not following or like my YouTube channel, there should be a subscribe button right down here in the corner. If you could smash that baby, I'd really appreciate it. As always, I appreciate you guys for watching. Thank you very much, and have a good day.